Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Marty Heiser. I'm back here in the shadows. Welcome to the Marty Heiser Show. There are no hockey players on the show tonight. So those of you wanting to meet very fit young men from Calgary, Alberta, you're just going to have to show up next year where the Danbury Whalers will be defending the Commissioner's Cup of the Federal Hockey League. Now, my co-host, partner in crime, Dave Straight, loves hockey. So he's desperately sad that we won't be interviewing and reliving some of the great joys that unfolded at the Danbury Ice Arena as the Danbury Whalers won the Commissioner's Cup. But we're going to go on to some important things. We're going to talk about politics, issues of the time, and there are a lot of them. And boys and girls, I'm a little conflicted. I'm just being honest. I don't think as clearly as some of the other people on the round table, or Chris Hocker, a Redding resident who is planning on running for First Selectman of Redding, and we're going to learn more about him. These guys are clear thinkers. They're not as fractured in their brain as I am. We have issues like the economy. Hey, the stock market just hit an all-time high. Housing prices are beginning to come back. Everything's fine. Yet I get this weird suspicion that we're printing too much goddamn money and that inflation is going to rear its ugly head and that there's this just catastrophe right around the corner, and we saw a little bit of that in Cyprus. I don't know. Somebody help me. Gay marriage. I think the best way is to have a mother and a father and raising their kids. The statistics bear this out. That's the best thing. The worst thing that's happened socially in our country, if you go back to the 50s to now, is the fact that there's so many one-parent families. The breakup of the nuclear family has had all sorts of devastating consequences. I want to defend traditional marriage. Yet I see some of these different activisms for gay marriage, and I can't help but be touched. These guys seem to really get along. Do they have rights? Is this a civil rights? I don't know. I need your help. I'm conflicted. And then finally with these gun laws, what happened in Newtown, I don't think we can just sit here and, hold to the status quo. I think it begs a response. But is what was passed last night in Connecticut, and by the way, is making the news all across the country, all across the world, is that the right approach? Many of the friends of politicians who have been on this show voted for it. Some didn't. Was that enough? Was it just a feel-good measure? Is it going to really make us safer? Are we somehow violating our Second Amendment rights? I'm conflicted. And my psychologist says that having a television show is good for me because it allows me to vent, it allows me to get direction, it allows me to have the conversation out and get clarity on some of these issues. The phone number here is 438-2003. We are joined by Chris Hocker, who's going to be running in Redding, Connecticut, and has a lot to say. He's a member, or he's very active in the Boys and Girls Club in Redding. The man went to Stanford University. In Stanford, they like to think of themselves as an Ivy League school, except of the West Coast variety. So, you get a little bit of that with that. But he's here. But more importantly, Dave Straight is here, and Dave he's loaded for bear. The guy is gone overdrive on the printer, and I just want to throw it to him and say, Dave, please help me. I'm like a sheep without a shepherd. I need a rabbi. I need a counselor. Direct me in the path I should go with these vital issues. Dave, I turn to you.
Marty, it's a treat to be here. So we're going to start with the lightning round. We're just going to rip through as much of the news that nobody really talked about or reported on as quick as we can. Not many people are aware of the fact that today the Connecticut legislature, among the other things they addressed, they also expanded the seatbelt law in Connecticut to include anybody watching the Marty Heiser Show. If you're watching the Marty Heiser Show, better have your seatbelt on. Our next guest is Chris Hocker, and his background is in education. He's on the school board in Redding. So I thought this was kind of pertinent because one of the topics we're going to discuss is why do public schools in general, why are they such a failure? And I thought this was kind of interesting. Here's the principal of a Bronx elementary school that, it's a very violent Bronx elementary school, as a matter of fact. And she's moonlighting as a gangster in B movies called Gang Girl. Now you got to ask yourself, do you want your principal as a gang girl? Another point on public school education, 80% of recent New York City high school graduates cannot read.
Whoa, slow down. How many cannot read?
Well, I can. 80% of recent New York City high school graduates cannot read. 80%, and you wonder why. Where did I read today that McDonald's now, I think it's Massachusetts, is requiring people to have an MBA to work the cash register at McDonald's. You wonder why.
80% cannot read.
Right.
And per pupil expenses, the New York City school system is one of the most expensive.
Yeah, it's around $20,000 per student. Moving on to the environment. Oh, this is going to hurt. CO2 emissions fall to a 20-year low in the U.S. Oh my, and guess what? After 20 years, there's no increase in global warming. Let's move on to Benghazi. The only terrorist suspect that was being held by the Obama administration was freed for lack of evidence. Also, remember when Obama promised he was going to close Gitmo Bay? Guess what? He changed his mind. Now we're going to spend $196 million in renovations for new construction. In the file on why did they think we're so stupid, the new Fusion Center director made the comment that we don't spy on Americans, just anti-government Americans. Okay. And for all those people that think the Saudis and the Muslim culture and Islam is repressive, ignore all that. Saudi religious police just lifted the ban on women riding bicycles, something we can all be proud of. And Germany, in the effort of keeping in the spirit of green energy and preventing global warming, it's been determined that a recent study showed that they are spending over $110 billion over the subsequent 3-year period to avoid global warming in the year 2100 by 37 hours. So if they didn't spend any of this money, the same level of global warming would be achieved 37 hours later. Nice way to spend your money. But let's move to the economy and sequester. Remember when sequester went into effect? That was going to be 1/20th of our deficit, $85 billion, 0.25% of GDP. It was no big deal. Now, however, everything bad that's happening in the universe is being blamed on sequester. So recently, or yesterday, it came out that Medicare doctors were turning away patients. And one particular clinic advised that 1/3 of their 16,000 patients would be denied Medicare service because they're not getting reimbursed at the same rate. Well, do you think cutting $700 billion from Medicare in Obamacare, let me back up, Obamacare cut $700 billion from Medicare. I think that might have something to do with it. So let's think about where we're spending money. The post office right now is losing $2.5 million an hour. They're spending
$2.5 million an hour?
In the time we do this show, the post office has lost $2.5 million. And here you go. They're spending $400,000 for portraits for people that work at the White House. $400,000. They're also spending $1.5 million a year to study beef jerky. Obama phones cost $2.2 million a year. That's a half, and a half of all the recipients are ineligible. They also spent $250,000 for a Volt. They spent up to $4 billion for jobs from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. Also, they spend $95,000 a year for a calligrapher. I don't know about you, Marty, but I think Microsoft Word works pretty good for that. They also, and since Obama's taken office, people need to realize we have 8 million fewer employed people today than when Obama took office. Other areas where we're spending money, $423,000 stimulus program on correct condom use. That was the Indiana University completed that study, and we're proud of that. Also, Big Sis is laid out for over 2 billion rounds of ammunition, and her explanation was, the more you buy, the less it costs. Now, I'm thinking to myself,
the government purchased $2 billion rounds of ammunition.
Yeah, that's enough to keep the wars going in the Middle East for the next 20 years. And her explanation was, we did it to lower costs. Other areas where we're spending money, government spent $880,000 to study the sex life of snails, $1.5 million to study why lesbians are overweight, and $385,000 to a Yale University ornithologist to study the length of duck, you know what's, sexual organs, that is. Also, the government spends $60,000 in welfare per household for everybody that's in poverty. And the budget that was passed by the Senate, which is the first one we've had in 5 years, is projected to add $4 trillion to the deficit. Moving on. I'm just getting winded, just getting fired up here. The Obama budget projected to increase spending by 55%. The New England Journal of Medicine says Obamacare will do nothing to increase affordability or increase quality of health care. And a recent study said that Obamacare would raise costs by 32%.
But hold on one second. When we were talking about Obamacare, we were told that our premiums were going to go down on average $2,500 per family.
Right. When it was proposed, it was intended to cost, or we were told, deceived into thinking it was going to cost $900 billion over 10 years. And last week, the CBO revised that to $2.6 trillion. They only missed it by 300%. They're getting better. Also, here's a chart of where the jobs are since Obama took office and now. 8 million jobs
Can I hold up
lost.
that chart? Okay,
Yep.
Go ahead.
And 47 million people are on food stamps, 23 million people are out of work, and American household wealth hit a 43-year low. U.S. debt per household now is 35% higher than Greece, and food stamp rolls in America now surpass the population of Spain. So for anybody that thinks that all of a sudden the economy is looking up and doing well, I don't think so. With that, I turn it back to you, Marty.
Well, the Mets are 2-1. They had a 2-game winning streak going, so they were briefly in first place in the National League, which is good to see. Yeah, this is a question because, really when you look at the stock market, I was hoping to get back to that graph, but I'd like to go to this if we could. When you look at the stock market and that going up, it really is if it is a recovery, they say we're in our 4th year of the Obama recovery, you're certainly not seeing it in the jobs numbers. And if it isn't in jobs, it's kind of a vacuous recovery. And I think that's what people are feeling, especially recent college graduates, people looking for jobs. It's quite heartbreaking what's going on out there. And so I'm a little concerned about it. But luckily for us, we have potential public servants like Chris Hocker. Chris, I want to welcome you to this roundtable discussion where we solve all the world's problems from 9 to 10 p.m. on Thursday night. And I'm very interested in your background and what is motivating you to potentially seek the nomination and the endorsement to run for First Selectman of Redding. What has prompted you to do this?
What has prompted me? Many things. Probably a lot of it is personal because it's the kind of activity that I've always been interested in and enjoyed as a volunteer for a number of years in Redding. And this is potentially an opportunity to move into it full time. Okay. The incumbent selectman, Natalie Ketchum, has announced her intention to step down, so it will be an open seat. Right. And I thought I would, at this point in my life, be in a position to volunteer and step into that and hopefully do a competent job for the folks of Redding. And I would enjoy that.
Now, in addition to your impressive academic credentials, Stanford University, you've also been involved in the Boys and Girls Club in Redding.
Very much so,
and different community involvement, as well as operating major electrical transmission projects. Just give us a little background, business-wise. What have you done for a living?
Well, I've been involved in the electric industry for about 30 years. Most recently, it's a company in Fairfield that's rather unusual. We have brought private capital and private expertise to the development and construction and operation of public infrastructure. In this case, major high-powered transmission lines. There's one that runs from New Jersey to Long Island underwater.
Right.
Brings 660 megawatts of power into Long Island. There's another one that goes down the Hudson River between New Jersey and Manhattan. Okay. That actually got a fair amount of media play a year or so ago, called Hudson Transmission. And so I'm with a team that has put that together.
Okay. Now, looking at the issues facing Redding, there are a couple things. I want to just sort of throw them out.
Sure.
One, I'm just going to give you the laundry list first, and then we'll tackle them one at a time. The Georgetown project, any people that drive up and down Route 7 and you look over at the buildings. Actually, there was a film filmed there, wasn't there, with Danny DeVito back in the day?
Apparently, they've used that site, different filmmakers at
Yeah.
different times.
It looks like a throwback to, I don't know, industrial age London or something like that. Factories that have been sit vacant now for decades, but there was a whole renovation plan, but then the economy tanked. What are you going to do with that? The West Reading Center, school costs. If you're anything like Ridgefield, enrollment is going down, yet somehow headcount as far as teachers and staff and school costs continue to go up. School safety, what would your plan be for that? That's a big issue, and some of those other issues. What about that? What is your growing platform? What would you bring to the citizens of Reading?
Well, that's a lot of ground to cover.
It's a big job for selectmen.
Well, and not all,
wear a lot of hats.
Not all of it is entirely within. People don't understand sometimes that in a town like Reading, under that form of government, but I think you know this,
Yeah.
that a lot of the authority is sort of fragmented among different boards, like the school board and all the rest of it. So people view this first selectman as sort of the emperor or something.
Yeah.
It doesn't quite work that way, because the school board has its own sort of autonomy.
Yeah.
I have opinions on that because I'm on the Region 9 school board.
Right.
That's different from the Reading school board that covers the elementary and middle school.
Right.
Region 9 is the Joel Barlow High School that is split between Reading and Easton.
Okay.
Geographically, it's in Reading, but slightly over half the kids.
So you're a member of that board?
Of that board,
And that's
yes.
an elected position?
It is,
Okay.
yeah, right. So I was elected in 2007, re-elected a couple years ago to that.
And so let's take one at a time. What about school costs? It seems to be a couple schools of thought. One is, hey, whatever the schools need, this is what makes our real estate valuable. Anything for the kids. Anyone who would dare to put on some, a green visor and look at the numbers and say, hey, couldn't we do a little bit better by the taxpayers? Just, hates children and doesn't appreciate education and should be silenced? Or do you feel like, hey, we should efficiently run these school systems, and it is the largest, most expensive element that the tax dollars go towards, and it needs to be looked at? Where do you fall on that spectrum?
No, I agree with that, and I think that it's interesting that in Reading and Easton, at the elementary and middle school level,
Right.
The population of the schools is in decline, is projected to become less.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at kindergarten, entry-level kindergarten, has that continued to go down?
It has gone down. It's awfully hard to predict with certainty what it's going to be in 2 or 3 or 5 years. You can look maybe 1 or 2 years ahead.
Yeah.
But depending on what else might be going on in the town, the projections may or may not be that accurate.
And what's going on in the economy. That's the heartbreaking thing about this recession that continues to linger on, is that kids coming out of college, they're not forming families. They're saying, I can't even get a job. How am I going to get married and start having kids and buy the house with the picket fence? I can't even, get it together to get a job. So there's declining enrollment, and it looks like it's continuing to decline.
Well, but what has happened in this particular window is that while the lower schools population has declined,
Right.
all those kids have moved up to the high school. So interestingly enough, Barlow, where I'm on the board,
Right.
is at an all-time high.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah. So the perception that all schools are declining, it probably isn't as visible in a town like Ridgefield that has one kind of unified school system.
Yeah.
In Reading, where we share the high school with Easton, and it's a separate board
Right.
and a separate, semi-separate governance. The two towns share a superintendent, but they're two different districts, and then Region 9 makes it a third district.
Right.
So this poor guy has to deal with 3 different boards.
Wow.
Which I give him a lot of credit. But the point is that the Barlow High School is facing actually an all-time high, about 1,050 kids.
So do you have an isolated budget just for the Barlow High School?
Yes, we do.
And is that, how much is that going up this year over year?
It is
percentage-wise?
being increased, or the proposed increase is 1.97%.
That seems very manageable. Has that gone before the Board of Finance in those
Well, that's the
towns, or
thing, is that
you're autonomous?
a regional board of education, of which there's a handful in Connecticut, a regional board of education is its own board of finance.
Well, okay.
Okay.
So what you say goes.
Well, it goes
second look.
as far as the voters.
Right.
So clearly, just as the Board of Finance puts the ultimate budget
Right.
before the town, in our case, we put our budget before the combined electorate of Reading and Easton,
And then it's voted on by
by Reading and Easton as a separate ballot proposition.
In the last 20 years, has a Board of Ed or your budget ever been voted down?
Oh, yeah.
It has?
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's like it's one.
Well, yeah,
You mentioned that, was it the principal that reports to 3 different districts?
the superintendent.
Superintendent.
Yeah.
And how does that person, the average tenure of a person in that job, how long do they last?
Let's see, I'm trying to remember. It's actually longer than you would think, except for the one we had just before the current one.
It was about 9 months or something?
No, he was about 18 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do they have post-traumatic stress disorder insurance policies for them, some of these superintendents? or-
Not that I'm aware of. I would say that it takes a certain type of individual, and this particular individual has many long years in public school administration and sort of understands how to deal with
Okay,
the system. So I give him a lot of credit.
good.
Now, when I look at the town's budget, I think the number is somewhere around 65% of the budget is the school system, maybe 70%.
I think it's more like 70 or 75, yeah.
Yeah. Is there any hope of ever reining that in?
As a percentage?
Or-
Yeah, or absolute cost.
Either way.
Either way. Well, I think, again, if the demographic projections that we look at as boards every year, if those play out, then you are going to see an absolute decline in number of kids enrolled, both in the lower schools and the high school. And I think inevitably you will see staffing decline. Staffing costs are the lion's share of any school cost. And I think that, one of the nice things about a town the size of Reading is that, relatively speaking, the governments are close to the people. In other words, anyone can show up, anyone can ask questions, anyone can understand if they want to the cost structure and how it all works. It's all there. Takes a fair amount of work to get it, but you can get it. Not to obtain it, but to understand it. But it's all there. So my point being that I think that there are enough watchdogs in town, both very much supportive of schools and those who are perhaps more skeptical,
Yeah.
who pay attention, understand where the money is going, and put the pressure on the boards to make appropriate cuts where necessary. I know that's what happened this time in the Reading school, where the overall increase was, I think, I'm going to say 0.6. It was quite small.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, to your point about having access to the people that are running the town, Natalie had a tradition of once a month, I think it was the first Wednesday of every month, of having the brown bag lunch where anybody could attend. Are you going to continue with that when you get elected?
When I get elected, well, I may be sitting on the stairs, outside with just my brown bag, or maybe in Reading it should be a green bag, but I would certainly like to do that.
When you talk about enrollment going down, if I was to tell you that there was a town in this area that has seen their student population go down by 406 students, and yet staffing levels in that time actually went up by 28, that more to the point in the last year there were 100 fewer students within the school system, and yet there were 12. There was an increase of 12 head count in staff. Would you be surprised at those numbers?
I would think that was the White House.
Yeah, I know.
I would be surprised unless there was some extraordinary reason, and the only extraordinary reason I could think of would be special education.
Well,
Because
yeah,
that's kind of a wild card, but in the absence of that, that strikes me as an imbalance.
it strikes me that way too, and those numbers are completely accurate for the town of Ridgefield. We were talking about this last night at the Board of Finance meeting. And again, education is the driver of our real estate values. It's why we choose to live in these towns. It's why we're proud of these towns. We want the absolute best for our children. Yet I think that there has to be some eye towards the bottom line in an environment of inclining enrollment. That's all. You know, it doesn't make you a bad person, but we have classes right now where there's as few as 14 kids in the class. You know, so it's a tough deal. Caller, do you have a question for our guest?
Yes, I do. Hello, Jesus is the Lord. How you doing? Listen, Chris, I think is your name. A couple of things I just wanted to ask you as a selectman. You know, these are local issues with the Newtown shootings, which is a neighboring town of Redding. You have an investigation that has gone on for how many months? Probably since, December? We're talking January, February, March. Here we are in April, and we still don't have any answers as to what's going on. I mean, there's been some footage from CBS or one of the major news networks of a camouflaged individual who was outside the school who ran into the woods and was apprehended by the police. And no one has ever, revealed who this was. There were other questions about film from the news coverage where the AR-15 that this individual was said to have committed the crime with was taken out afterwards out of the vehicle that was his vehicle or a vehicle that was in the parking lot. So, and of course the initial report said that he used a handgun. So there's a lot of questions on that, and of course there's so many questions about when the medical staff came and they were turned away when 15 minutes after this happened, 20 minutes ambulances were turned away when all the people obviously may need medical attention. There's very many questions on that I'd like to see if you have any thoughts on that. And the other issue I'd like to say, which is a very local issue, is if you get in office, how do you handle the fact that immigration, illegal immigration, is so bad in this country, but also in the locality here, how this affects the economy. An immigrant, described in the Black's Law Book is someone who goes to a place to stay there permanently. And of course, most of the immigrants we have here, illegal immigrants, coming here to work, take their money, and then go back to their own country. This affects our economy, affects the jobs, and so forth.
All right.
I just want to
You're giving us a lot to chew on.
I just want to say this, Marty.
Yes.
This ties into Mayor Barletta from Pennsylvania, who's now in Congress. When we have local positions, this goes on to national politics.
Excellent.
As well.
No,
If you could give me a comment on that.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, in 30 seconds or less. School safety, immigration, and that camel guy in the woods. Have you tracked him down? Go right ahead.
I have not, and of course, as the caller pointed out, Redding is not Newtown. I can only speak from the perspective, first of all, as a school board member.
Right.
I don't think there's anyone who has any connection to the public schools that that didn't have their heads just totally spun around by what happened at Newtown. Yeah. And I think it's provoked an awful lot of thought and a lot of rethinking.
Are you adding SROs, security resource officers in schools?
At Barlow, no. At Redding Elementary and Middle, yes.
Okay. Yeah, we are too.
Yeah, and the school board in Redding clearly felt that there was that it was desirable to have that.
Yeah.
And
then we're looking also at reinforcing the entrances, dual scanning.
Right, which is being done.
Listen, I admire you for throwing your hat in the ring.
Okay.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I admire you for calling Dave Straight a friend of yours. That's a burden that few shoulders can bear.
I consider it preparation for my next gig.
Yeah. No. Listen, we wish you all the luck in the world. I hope you'll come back between now and whenever your election is.
Be happy to, sure.
And I'm telling you, in this democracy, it's because men like you can take your vast knowledge and put it to work as a public servant that I think benefits everyone.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Really appreciate you running.
All right.
Great. Well, we're gonna go to our round table, and I'm sitting here in sort of the shadows here. I'm not sure why, but we're really sort of dark and in the shadows. I don't know if you've ever in junior high. I used to come home and watch Dark Shadows up right in front of the camera. That's not good. All right, and back. Okay, there we go. All right. You're not going to believe this, but this is live television, ladies and gentlemen. That's right, live television. And yeah, the show I used to come home and watch is Dark Shadows. Yeah, some of you, I'm going back a ways here. This is when you had, your 5 TV stations, and Dark Shadows was this
pretty
sort of.
mysterious, Marty.
That's what I'm saying. It was like this hip sort of vampire. Did you ever watch Dark Shadows?
Barnabas College.
There you go. So I feel a little bit like Dark Shadows. Good evening and welcome to the Marty Heiser Show. I'm back here in the shadow. Okay, we've got some important things to talk about here. Dave, why don't you go down the list and introduce everyone in this round table? We got 30 minutes to solve the world's problems. Introduce everyone.
Let me tell you, we'll start with Larry Ditkoff. Every time he's on the show, ratings explode, the women go crazy, and the phones light up.
Yeah,
Jim Bolano and Bob Moran, so we kind of tried to balance this a little bit with 2 left-leaning and then 3 balanced people to cover these topics today. We actually have an outline to follow today.
We do.
Wow.
I imagine that.
And we're done with the outline. So what are we going to talk about?
Yes.
No, I mean, a couple things. I mean, I opened the show with how conflicted I am. The economy, gay marriage, gun laws. I think there's so many different perspectives on this. Why don't, since we have an Ivy League trained economist in our midst, or a guy who, I don't know, trades stocks or something.
Yeah. As opposed to someone who went to Stanford, Marty.
Well, Stanford's pretty good.
Stanford's pretty good.
As an Ivy League grad, do you consider Stanford
Awesome.
an Ivy League school as well?
Well, Stanford's right up there, Marty.
Right up there.
Right up
okay,
there.
see, that's kind of, no, what's a,
I don't know, 55 grand a year, it's got to do something, right?
I wanted to go.
And Michelle Wee and Tiger Woods went there. Plus John Elway, and then Luck guy, right?
Yeah, that Luck guy too.
He's
Yeah,
doing pretty
yeah.
good too.
Jim Plunkett.
And Jim Plunkett went
Well,
there
I
too?
go, yeah.
Excellent.
1970 Heiser.
But anyways, what about this economy? Stock market at an all-time high.
Yeah.
Housing prices seem to be coming back.
Right.
Yet there are no jobs, and I got this sinking suspicion that we're printing too much money and the whole thing's going to collapse. Give me some reassurance.
Yeah, well, let's see. Well, we got another jobs report tomorrow. That should give us a little. Hopefully,
suicide hotline time.
we should hope not, Marty, but hopefully it'll give
Talk
us.
me back from the edge, Larry. I'm holding on by a very thin line.
Marty, as you well know, I think you've gone way over the edge many an occasion. But to get to your point about the economy, look, I've never been on the show and said that it's wholly humming along. What I have said is that, and me and my differential analyses, that the economy is it's on its way back. You have seen positive job growth. You've at least positive signs I've been seeing in the manufacturing sector of late. You look at the Michigan, the Purchasing Managers Index.
Tons of cars are being sold. Ford had a good number.
Yeah,
GM
Ford's had some good
number.
numbers. I mean, look, so there are, there are definitely positives. You look at Europe and the problems they're having there. That's going to be a headwind as far as the global economy as well, which clearly impacts the United States as well. So, I think things are promising. Economic growth has not been as strong as I would have hoped it had been. You look at. But many times, or most cases, I think we've talked about Reinhardt and Rogoff, the Harvard economist, also an Ivy League school, even though I can't stand them. Even though Harvard blew my NCAA pool, so I have a real thing with
I actually
that.
played golf with both those guys last year. Reinhardt, great short game. Seriously, really good. Go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Reinhardt's a woman.
Oh, sorry.
Carmen Reinhardt. Doesn't mean she can't have a good short game, but that stock. Excuse me, not stock, but economic crises or economic downturns that are caused by excess lending as opposed to just the general business cycle usually take longer to, come out of.
All right.
And that's part of an issue. Part
Bob,
of the issue here.
you know about all things electronics, IT technology. You're on the cutting edge of this stuff. What do you think? Where do you see this economy going? Are we on the right track?
I'm in the process of reading David Stockman's book, and it terrifies the hell out of me.
Okay, now just for
papering, we're generating too much money. We're papering the universe with money. The other thing is jobs are not going to come back as the technological revolution is accelerating. So it takes fewer people to make stuff.
Don't need a bank teller. You
Like
got
making,
a kiosk.
well, in terms of like cars. Your cars now are becoming robotically built.
Yeah.
So you need fewer people to run them. If you go into certain facilities that are robotic, they're totally dark. And the systems now have artificial intelligence. So you train the system and you let it go. And so what's happening is we're fewer people generating more stuff. So Steve Jobs said to Obama, the jobs are never going to come back because the technological acceleration is so great, it's reality. There's no longer tons of bodies making stuff. Even the Chinese now are starting to move into robotics because it's cheaper to train a bot and it's more precise and it's faster.
They don't go
And we're
on
seeing
strike.
this everywhere. We're
You don't
seeing
gotta
this
pay for
throughout the entire
healthcare.
And
world.
they can't build pipelines.
No question. We're seeing this throughout the entire world. And it's exhilarating, but it's also, what do we do with people that will never find work? Because that's exactly what's happening with college grads who come out. What are you trained for? Degrees are starting to become less important. They're becoming less important because what can you do? And so much of it's now technologically driven. You learn online. What's happening with Stanford? What's happening with schools? My alma mater, Lafayette, $65,000 a year. Now you're starting to see schools going online for free. The massively online courses. We're seeing a technological shift that is so disruptive. It's going to impact medicine, science, business, finance, and government. It's tremendous, it's huge, and it's out there.
You're painting this vaguely, science fiction, the robots take over.
But it's not
I think
science fiction
Schwarzenegger's going to
anymore.
walk in here going,
It's-
you're really screwed up, the
it's-
robots are in charge now.
Soylent Green is people.
Yeah.
sounds great.
Well, you're a college professor, Jim. Well, give us some balance here.
I don't know if I have balance. I think historically the U.S. has never answered the question from the 1970s, which is the shift of manufacturing competition from overseas. And it used to be in this country, if you didn't have even a high school degree, certainly not a college degree, you can get out and get a job and make something, and it's probably a union job, and you can get along and raise a family and buy a home and all that. Those jobs are gone. For that sector of the society, we've never figured out what to do with them. And now there's
Rust
pressure. What's that?
The Rust Belt.
Yeah, but yeah, and then even on the high tech side, which what used to be the safer side of manufacturing, as you just described, we're going to find some pressure there. So we shifted from this manufacturing economy to a service economy, and then we're seeing the printing of, or the Wall Street shifting of money for money, pushing money around to make money. Because that's all we have left. We don't make anything anymore. We've never answered the question, what's the next evolutionary step for our economy to be a healthy economy? And so we're just kind of drifting. It's been about 30 years. But the only sector, sadly, that has grown is the government sector. And that's the one that keeps getting bigger. And I know that, the left doesn't like to hear about socialism or Euro-socialism and this and that. But what do we hear on the news every day? We hear the sequester's cut. We're going to send the economy into a tizzy. You don't raise the debt limit, the economy is going to go bust. We hit the fiscal cliff. So it's all about government having this terrible effect on the economy. So yeah, that's why we're thinking that we have too much government and we're becoming Euro-socialized. The auto industry, they're selling cars, but it's a nationalized business now.
The phone number here is 203-438-2003. If you want to join, if there's some subtle nuance we're not getting, please don't hesitate to call in. Dave, what are your thoughts?
I always like to just grind on the facts. Here are the
don't
facts.
confuse us with the facts.
Well, if
Never
you
let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Yeah, that's right. All of corporate America has to adhere to GAAP standards, generally accepted accounting principles. Larry could give us about a 10-hour lecture on GAAP.
Right.
If the federal government was held to GAAP accounting principles, the deficit last year was $6 trillion. That's over 45% of the total budget for the U.S. government. Think about that. 45% of total GDP, which is 1.5 times the federal budget. $6 trillion deficit, okay. We touched on printing money. Today, 5 years into this so-called recovery, Japan announced a $1.4 trillion money printing effort. $1.4 trillion. You throw in
Japan is printing yen? Is that what we're talking
no,
about?
Yeah.
dollar. No, it's $1.4 trillion equivalent.
Of yen.
Oh, yeah.
yen.
Of
Okay,
yen,
okay.
yeah.
Meanwhile, the U.S. is printing $85 billion a month. The UK said they're going to hold steady at their $450 billion plan. China has an unlimited QE program going, and the EU does also. Now,
Kind of like we're playing Monopoly,
Yes.
and we went out and bought 20 more Monopoly games and just took the money out and added it to everyone's Monopoly thing.
Right, but here's the problem. It used to be back when you're an exporting nation, as we were back in the 50s and 60s, there's this thing called velocity of money. So for every dollar you put in, or every 1 unit you put in, you would get about 4 units out. Roughly that relationship. Today, there is no velocity of money. So for every 1 unit you put in, you're getting about 0.7 out. So all of this printing really doesn't do anything. So
You're referring to the multiplier effect? Is that what you're
yeah.
Okay.
Well, lines the pockets of Wall Street.
Please.
All right, thank you, Marty. Couple of points. One, in regards to Bob's point, if you go back to the Industrial Revolution and you had the Luddites who came in and went around smashing machines precisely because they were going to take away jobs from the hand laborer.
Right.
Technological innovation, is always going to be the case, and it is going to be a positive cause. It does lead to disruptions in certain jobs, but also creates other jobs. That's one.
He's got a point there. It does seem like the free market economy will always adapt to the latest technology, to the latest improvement. I'm in the painting business. When the roller first came out, everyone thought that was the end of the painting business because you could paint so fast with a roller. But lo and behold, it's all worked out, and we've
See,
absorbed it.
technology is a tool. Okay? It's like a shovel.
Right.
And there's no morality to this tool. So when we had this debacle in 2008, technology abetted it. I can take $1 and change it into bits.
Right.
And then I can assign any value to that bit. And then I can move it anywhere I want.
Right.
I can encrypt stuff that's really toxic. I can do some really amazing manipulations with the currency.
You could
because now it's
sell it to
abstracted.
a small village in Norway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what happens is you have this tremendous churn, and then you're able to pick and choose. Like, I look at the Dodd-Frank bill as a disaster because nothing's identified. If you don't know the metadata, the fancy terms for what you're selling, you can never regulate it.
Well, the rules
So
and regs
instead, you
haven't
want it to
been-
be transparent. You want the system. If you really want capitalism, and this is what Stockman talks about, this is what Ron Paul talks about, this is what so many people talk about, is transparency. I believe in capitalism, no question, but I believe in transparency to make it happen, to make it right. And it's not right. It's proprietary closed data sets. It goes on and on and on. And yet the same technology used to game the system is also being used to solve cancer. The same exact technology, you're just taking the bits and I'm applying it to medicine instead of the manipulation of money.
But as Larry points out, you can't put the genie back in the bottle.
Well, also,
the technology is here. You can't try to.
He's talking about a government Wall Street access.
Yes,
That
Yes.
that is neither right or left.
Right.
exactly right.
And it's something different. That it doesn't matter where you stand, right or left. The deck is stacked against the American people.
But Marty, I also wanted to point out there's also growing world economies. China, which had been agrarian for centuries, is now becoming more urban, becoming more modern. There's going to be tremendous demand for our products and our
They
services.
got 1 billion people over there that need
of the-
refrigerators.
That sort of thing, yeah, and that's going to be where
There's 1.3 billion Chinese.
More or less.
300,000 of them are doing pretty good.
Yeah.
But there's 1 billion that live back in the villages of
Right, and
China.
there's
They're not
going to
going
be
to let us build them and
well,
send them over there.
there's going to be demand for not just American products, but also commodities,
I don't know if that's
and
necessarily
also
true. I do think China does trade with American companies. American companies are
If
selling
they open
products.
the plant over there, there's a lot of restrictions
There's
on
actually
American
here's a
companies.
thought.
we hear about what Apple.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying. Recently, Tim Cook, who's the CEO over at Apple after Steve Jobs,
Yeah.
actually was apologizing to the Chinese, for some of the products they put out. So I mean, I think you're seeing American business is starting, to view China not just as a competitor, but also as as a tremendous
Of
source
all
of the
things,
foreign market.
it's a little product, but there's if you need to clean factory floors, huge factory floors, you need almost an autonomous electric powered. It's like a mini Zamboni, and there's a company in Connecticut that manufactures these things, and they are experiencing wonderful growth because there are all these factories over in China that need this unique thing that's manufactured in Connecticut, and they're selling it in China. So I think China, I mean, their markets might not be as open as we would like, and their currency policies might not be favorable to us, but we're selling a lot of chicken and Apple products and these, floor cleaning Zambonis over there, so you'd like to see that continue. Let me just switch gears real quick, and this is a hot topic, because just now in Connecticut, they just passed the most overbearing gun law in the country. However, I thought Connecticut had already had the most,
We're number 4.
The Brady campaign ranked us like 5th or something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
they
I don't
have
know. I
laws.
mean, I
So
guess
now we're
we're
number
just
1 or 2.
piling it on. Dave, this is your issue.
Let me-
Good thing, bad thing, disaster. What are we looking
Well,
at?
let's go to 30,000 feet and take a look at what gun laws do. Gun laws, by definition, are sexist, they're racist, they're elitist, and they discriminate against the elderly and the weak.
Wow.
Do I need an explanation on that? Well, let me give it. So, how is a modest-sized female ever going to defend herself against a rapist that's 25 years old and 220 pounds? The only way that she can level the playing field in a defensive situation is if she's armed. Why is it racist? Because the people that are passing these laws live in low-crime neighborhoods in the burbs with armed guards like Mayor Bloomberg and the president, and have alarm systems on their house. You know what? They're not the high-risk candidates. It really doesn't affect them too much. It's the people in the inner city. Look at the inner city of Chicago. When they passed their gun laws back in the early 90s, since then, violent crime exploded with handguns. Now, why is it elitist? I explained that. Because the people that are promoting these rules live in very, very nice low-crime neighborhoods. Why does it discriminate against the elderly? How is a 75-year-old person, woman, living at home alone, a widow, ever going to defend herself against an intruder? There's only one way. How does it?
So the 75-year-old woman living at home is going to be packing heat.
I'll give you a
last time
dozen.
he comes through the
I
door.
will give you a dozen stories where that's been the case. It happens all the time. Every 5 minutes in this country, a legal gun owner interrupts a crime. Every 5 minutes. Think about that. And why does it discriminate against the weak? Listen, if you're disabled, if you're in a wheelchair, how are you ever going to defend yourself against an intruder? There's only one way, if you're armed and you have an armed response. The majority of these gun laws discriminate. Like I said, they're sexist, they're racist, they're elitist, they discriminate against the elderly and the weak. That's just it.
I guess that's one way of looking at it.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
Well, it's the right way.
Well, if that's the right way.
But how can you,
Let's hear the left way.
how can you argue against it?
There
goes the
10
plane.
minutes
The
left in
plane
the
is
show.
taking off.
92% of people are for background checks in this country. Amongst the black community.
Did I say I was against background checks?
You're talking about gun laws, and I
I
wasn't talking
said
about.
most gun laws. So let's think about the gun laws that they passed today. They limited the number of bullets that you can have in a gun.
Correct.
Let me tell you something.
Dave,
If
I'm
three
not-
people come into my house, I'm going to need a lot more than 30 rounds. That's just it.
it's not just.
I have a story
that's
here of
not
a guy
just-
that was hit
that's-
15
that's
times
not
and
just-
lived.
That's not just it, Dave.
This guy was hit 15 times and lived.
Dave, you said you can
The
quote
woman
10
in Georgia,
examples.
the
I can
woman in
quote
Georgia unloaded a
hundreds.
6-round clip at a
100
guy at
examples.
point blank range,
Yeah.
and the guy made it out to his car into the pickup truck. Let me tell you something. If you've got intruders coming in the house, I do not want to be caught reloading.
Let me tell you something, Dave. What about the guy in Alabama who says, I need a gun for personal protection, goes into a bar, gets into an argument after getting drunk and kills 2 people? What about the fact that the overwhelming majority of black people, you mentioned that they were, that these laws were racist, African American, if you will, are overwhelmingly for stricter gun regulation. I was hearing it today, on the radio. So are Latinos. So are most people on the lower, if you're the lower economic spectrum. I don't think that's true. I don't think that gun laws are racist. I don't think they're elitist. I'll tell you what I do think. I'm much more concerned about the magazines than the background checks. What I think, I mean, the magazines in terms of...
So if you pass a law banning them, then it goes away.
Dave,
You know, there are laws against bank robberies.
I was very patient when you were speaking.
Okay.
Okay. The reason is that, yeah, the guy, what's his name, lands 154 shots at Sandy Hook. Yeah, that's what it was. I don't know how many times he had to reload or take out the magazine, but he would have probably gotten off less. He would have gotten off fewer shots if he had less of a magazine. But the issue, I think, in gun control, and people talk about, well, is it a mental health issue? Is it this or is it that? I think it's an issue of attitudes have to change. I'm sure everyone's aware. Let me just finish. I promise I'll land the train. Give me 1 minute and I'll be quiet. 45 years ago today, MLK was shot at the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis. And as terrible an event what it was even worse is that there were a lot of people who celebrated. Why? Because racism, sadly to say, was pretty
Celebrated the shooting
Yes,
of
a
Martin
lot of
Luther
people did.
King?
My father told me. No, he was not one of them, but he told me that there were people who were happy.
Hey, Marty, can I say something?
And let me just make my point. Let me make my point.
You've been making-
Is that 40? Just give me 30 seconds. I do use up 30 seconds. Attitudes have to change, and in part, and a lot of times government has to take the role. You have the 64 Act, the 65 Act. Yes, I know the MLK shooting was after that, but you find over time that type of overt hatred and overt anger has just gone away, in large part because of you giving me a face, because of government intervention. We have to see that in guns as well. It's such a gun-loving country that.
Yeah, but here's
Okay,
the
go
thing
ahead, Jim.
about your polls. It should be a big who cares. The Second Amendment is, I don't own a gun, never owned a gun, probably never will own a gun. But it's the Second Amendment to the Constitution. Why is the Second Amendment to the Constitution the only one that's subject to this needs-based analysis? Who needs an AR-15? Okay, what if we did with the First Amendment? Who needs the Ku Klux Klan to speak? Do we need that? We should take that right away. If you're innocent, why?
Not germane.
Why is it a needs-based analysis?
Because
Barry?
the first.
If you're innocent, do you need the cops?
The first phrase.
I had 30 seconds.
No, you just asked me a
30
question.
seconds.
You just asked me.
I didn't ask you a question.
Did you ask
It's
me
a
a question?
rhetorical question.
Oh.
If you're innocent, why do the police need a warrant to search your house? You're innocent. What difference does it make?
The First Amendment. The first
Why is
phrase.
the Second Amendment subject to a needs-based analysis when everything else gets strict
Strict
scrutiny?
construction.
Can I-
Strict
can I
construction
say
likes to say
something?
that the Constitution should be interpreted as written. And it says in order to, what's those words? In order to keep a well-regulated.
Strict scrutiny.
No, I'm talking about in order to keep a well-regulated militia. That's why.
The
Because
Supreme
there is
Court
no
has ruled on
reason.
Heller and McDonald, and the right to bear arms exists. But why are we subjecting it to a needs-based analysis? Why don't we ask those questions with other amendments?
What I'm saying is that the
Caller, do
first
you
part
own
of
a
the Second
gun?
Amendment isn't given any credence
Of course
whatsoever.
it was.
Caller, hold on. We have a gun. You own a gun, caller?
Yes,
And what's your perspective on all this?
my perspective is that we have a bunch of legislators patting themselves on the back on passing a law, and all we talked about was guns and magazine size, and instead of going after the real root of the problem, which of course is mental illness. You look at Columbine, those two kids, they were going to finish that shooting by shooting two propane tanks in the cafeteria. Are we going to outlaw propane tanks and tell everyone they can't have gas grills because they are a weapon of mass destruction? Lanza was a very intelligent young man. He probably could have looked up and found a way to make a bomb and blown up the school. Would you feel better about that? And then we'd have to, I guess, get rid of any type of fertilizer or anything you can buy at Home Depot, which you could put together. Again, we're totally missing the point. We're looking at the weapons, and we're looking at issues we shouldn't even be looking at, because the vast majority of card-carrying NRA members are law-abiding citizens, and we're penalizing all these Americans because of a tiny percentage of non-law-abiding people. And by the way, and you talk to any police off the record, they will tell you that the only people that will have large magazines would be the bad guys. And the NRA members and the other people will abide by the law, but in the end, guess who will be much more unsafe? Anyway, that was my
All right. Well, listen, I really appreciate it very much.
Let's get Bob.
Bob Moran, give us some perspective on
Okay.
this.
I'm definitely
Do you
for
own a
it.
gun?
No, but I'm comfortable with guns.
Okay.
I have no problem with guns. I have no problem with people owning guns. I like the idea of background check and consistency.
Right.
But there's another issue that you and I talked about, the 3D printing of guns, the ability to be able to manufacture these things.
Yeah.
When we talked, I said, well, the only thing missing was the barrel. Well, now guys in Texas are creating guns that can shoot 300 rounds with a barrel. So now we're talking about a type of thing that goes an end around. We have a situation that's happening technologically that's impacting every aspect of our lives. And the Second Amendment, the right to own guns, well-regulated militia, the whole 9 yards. And we're having something that's circumventing it. So how do you legislate this? How do you regulate this? It's like toothpaste out of a tube. Once it's out of the tube, you have a real problem here. And this is the type of thing that David and I have talked about, and it's something that's very, very, it's fascinating, it's terrifying, and it's interesting at the same time.
Because legislation always takes care of the last crime, not
Yes,
the next crime.
exactly
That's why
right.
it's,
Caller, we have 30 seconds left. Share your thoughts, quick.
I'll be real fast. Yeah, first off, it's mind-boggling that that somebody can go around and say that these gun laws are racist and sexist and this goes on rant without any counterpoint to this nonsense. It doesn't make any sense to see that every single state legislator
20 seconds.
voted in favor of this, gun law proposal. It's just kind of said it was done in a bipartisan manner. Second of all, back to Mr. Strait again. He picks up a chart from the Republican Study Committee that nobody talks about. I mean, if you're going to have somebody come on the show, at least have them come on and at least, do something like that. Back it up with real facts and say, what are you getting this response?
Hat City Blog, check it out. And we want to have Al Robinson in. Thanks for the call. In 2 seconds or less, greatest thing that we need to focus on in America today. Quick.
Economy.
Economy?
economy, everything else is a distraction.
Rebuild the family.
Rebuild the family.
Economy.
Economy. 3 for the economy, 1 for the family. Thank you for joining us on the Marty Heiser Show. Join us again next week. We won't have any other hockey players here, but it's going to be an exciting show. And Dave Strait is most likely going to be hosting, and I'm most likely going to be somewhere else. But you never know. You just don't know. My life is out of control. But thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week. Marty Heiser Show, where you always get the truth, or at least my perspective of the truth, and then Larry can tell me where I'm wrong. Thursday night, 9 to 10 p.m. Thanks for joining us. See you next week. Good night.